All right, so my presentation is on the global food crisis. And there are two key terms that you should know that go along with the food crisis. So that would be food insecurity and food security. We talked a little bit about this in class, but here is the definitions for them that I found again. So food insecurity, it is the state of being without reliable access to a significant quantity of affordable and nutritious food. And according to the United States Agency for International Development, food security means having at all times both physical and economic access to sufficient food to meet dietary needs for a productive and healthy life. Here's another definition I found from USDA for food insecurity. It's consistent access to adequate food is limited by a lack of money and other resources at times during the year. So what is the global food crisis? Well, the UN says that the global food crisis is more about affordability than availability. In other words, even if, food might be available for some people, they may not be able to afford it and receive it. An article from CNBC lays out a few key points regarding the UN's findings. The war in Ukraine has put a lot of fuel on an already burning fire as food prices are continuously rising. It is estimated that food prices could jump another 8.5% globally by 2027. Fertilizer prices are also continuing to rise, contributing to higher food prices, because if it is costing more, producers more to make food, like make crops with fertilizer, then that is going to pass on to the consumers. We're now going to watch a video from CNBC about, how it's more about affordability than availability.
Meaning that there's no, there is food available, but the prices are really high. But if we are unable to deal with certain things like fertilizer, availability of fertilizer for farmers, not only actual fertilizer being available, but at an affordable cost, then this crisis will turn into a crisis of availability come next year. And that is going to just spike the prices even more so. So what we are working hard to avoid is the current availability crisis not turning into availability crisis come 2023.
And one of the other critical challenges here is finding sustainable solutions. A lot of talk, but very little action, because so many of these factors are outside of governmental or organizational control. But Arif, to that point, what is the World Food Programme doing to address some of these challenges? And are there measures that can be taken in the short term to alleviate some of the pressures?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think what is really important is to make sure that we are able to save people's lives. I like to say that, when World Food Programme is setting records, that does not bode well for humanity, for people. And in 2020, we assisted 116 million people. That was a record in our 60-year history. In 2021, we assisted 128 million people. And obviously then that was a record. And this year we are planning to assist 142 million people, which again will be a record. So needs are going up. We need to assist more people, and we need two things in order to do that. We need resources, as in financial resources, and we need access. If you have the money but no access to these places, it's not going to work. But if you have all the access and no money, still it's not going to work. So our appeal is to keep giving generously so we can save lives. Now that is immediate. The second thing which needs to happen is we need to diversify our export bases. Right now, if you look in the world, 10 countries, less than 10 countries, make 80-90% of exports of commodities like wheat, corn, rice, soybean. And the stocks, the reserves are even tighter, meaning 5 countries, 6 countries hold 80-90% of stocks of these commodities. So whenever there is some kind of a shock to any one of those countries, you see the ramifications of that not only in those countries but across the world. And this is what we are experiencing as we speak. Now, let me just say on Ukraine also that the days of having actions and reactions in one place, meaning a war in one place and its consequences still in that place, they're long gone. What we see today is war in one place and the ramifications of that thousands of miles away. And this is what we are experiencing with Ukraine.
Okay, so now we're going to discuss some of my takeaways from the video and article. So again, it will not work if someone has access to the food but not the means or the money to receive it. The same goes for if someone has the money for it but not the resources. Food prices remain high as the war in Ukraine adds more pressure to the already struggling supply chain along with climate change and other inputs. Ukraine is a major producer of several commodities such as wheat, corn, and sunflower oil, and thus these are going to become more limited due to the current circumstances. Exports globally have also been restricted due to Russia's invasion, and economist Arif Hussein states this crisis is about affordability, meaning there's food available, but the prices are really high. So my takeaways continued. According to the figures from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, global food prices in July were 13% higher than a year ago, and prices could keep rising. As mentioned before, the worst case scenario. Hold on. The worst case scenario, the UN estimates that food prices could jump another 8.5% by 2027. Fertilizer prices are also rising, contributing to higher food prices because those costs are going to be passed on to consumers. Prices jumped after Russia, which accounts for 14% of global fertilizer exports, and therefore fertilizer is becoming more limited, and this is impacting farms and producers' crop yields. So the UN estimates that the number of people in hunger emergencies, which is defined as being one step away from famine, has jumped from 135 million in 2019 to 345 million. Extreme weather and climate change are also exacerbating conditions, contributing to global food insecurity. China, for example, the world's biggest wheat producer, has suffered multiple weather disruptions from flash floods to severe droughts. The weather in China has been so bad lately that the country issued its first drought emergency. Dozens of cities in southern and central provinces experienced temperatures exceeding 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This extreme heat wave jeopardized crop fields and livestock for many, and thus it limited production greatly. Now we're going to talk about how the global food crisis impacted women specifically. So another article from CNBC stated that the global food crisis sees 150 million more women than men going hungry. The article points out that of the 828 million people affected by hunger in 2021, approximately 2/3 of that were women. The gap between men's and women's food security has grown 8.4 times since 2018. In addition to this, with the onset of Russia's war in Ukraine, the situation is assumedly going to get worse. So here's some additional article takeaways. Here's another, statistic of the estimated 828 million people. Here it says around 3 in 5, or 59%, were women. And this was released earlier this month. Again, that's equivalent to 150 million more women facing food insecurity than men. So big difference. Women are responsible for 85 to 90% of household food preparation globally, and most food shopping. Thus, it is fair to say that women tend to bear the bigger burden than men when it comes to being food insecure due to the additional pressures they face, such as feeding their own family and taking care of their own needs. They have more responsibility and more of an expectation to provide for their family and to make dinner and provide food. In Somalia, for example, men reported eating smaller meals while women reported skipping meals altogether. In Lebanon, at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, 85% people reported reducing the number of meals they ate. However, 85% of women reported that they were eating smaller portions, while only 57% of men said the same thing. Meantime, in Bangladesh, 1 in 5, or approximately 21% of women, reported experiencing increased violence at home as a result of higher food prices. Now we're going to watch the news video that goes along with that article.
Some of the numbers that you had in your report, 150 million more women facing food insecurity than men. Why are women feeling the pressure more when it comes to food security?
Gender inequality really grew during the pandemic. In fact, women's rights, some estimates say that they've been set back by an entire generation. And so part of what's happening is you see this gap growing. A way to think about the way the gap has grown is that if every woman on the west coast of the United States had this problem in 2018, by 2021, it was every woman in the United States. That's how fast the gap is growing, because women are expected to cook the food and prepare the food, but they're also expected to eat last and least.
Emily, let's get into a little bit deeper dive on that inequality then. With them having to prepare the food, it obviously is taking them a whole lot as well to be the front runners of many homes as well globally. Is the impact based on also that they're perhaps giving up a little bit more of their own nutrition and food security in order to look after families where they are maybe the head of the household?
Yeah, there's a quote from a woman that we spoke to in Nigeria who said, "Everyone in the family has reduced the amount we eat, except my husband, who is the man of the household." Women are expected to cut back first, and you'll see cases where both men and women are food insecure, but where men might be eating smaller meals, women are skipping meals altogether. Or men are eating food that's less expensive, and women aren't eating any. So you start to see them giving up first in order to make sure that their families are fed.
Also, on unaffordability, 3.1 billion people unable to afford it. Some of the statistics, 3.4, if I'm not mistaken, dollars a day to get a healthy diet. If you take the average salary globally, it's around $4. That means this number is bound to get worse and worse because of the cost of living crisis globally, right?
Absolutely. And not only that, there's the average, but there are also how many millions and billions of people are living below that $3 a day, living below the poverty line. Those numbers have gotten worse. Extreme poverty is going up. And so those numbers are not only getting worse, we expect to see them to climb over the next year.
All right, so how serious is this food crisis? Well, to put it in perspective, 1 in 7 are currently in hunger. 12 million U.S. families, or about 34 million people, are classified as being food insecure, and as many as 811 million people, about 10% of the world's population, go to bed hungry. So as we learned in class, there are many causes of food insecurity, one of them being having a lack of food entitlement, and that can mean a variety of things, including inequality, appropriation, poor governance, and subsidies. Other causes would be, increasing population, underinvestment in agricultural research, obviously conflict and poverty also contribute to being food insecure. They kind of go hand in hand, and climate change and other environmental factors is also a big cause, because things like droughts, water shortages, soil and pollution, those are all things that can impact the supply chain and producers and, crop yields. Another one would be global economic failure, as well as rising costs in oil, fertilizer, transport, etc. So there are several solutions to help improve food security for the future. So a big one would be improving governance and leadership, securing food entitlement, pursuing and encouraging technological breakthroughs, addressing, demand and supply for food, improving production models, having active government support and protection of agriculture, making it a priority for poor countries, and finally promoting farming done by small-scale producers as well as the more large-scale ones. Now we'll watch a short video from the UN about, the global food issues. Alright, so the final thing I wanted to address was how did COVID-19 impact the global food crisis? Well, during the pandemic year of 2020, food insecurity ticked up in the United States, especially for households with children. Almost 15% of them were classified as being food insecure by the USDA, and again, that is defined as experiencing difficulty to meet basic food needs in the span of 1 year under a number of different conditions. In 2019, that share had been 13.6%. For all households, food insecurity is at its downwards trajectory in 2020, with 10.5% of all U.S. households being classified as food insecure, the same as the previous year. So if you take a look at the graph, you can see that in 2009, food insecurity was at an all-time high, with households with children being at 21.3%. Now you can kind of see that number decline, but then again, because of the pandemic in 2020, it is starting to rise again. It is almost at 15%, and that number is projected to rise an additional 8.5% within the next 5 years. So to summarize, the global food crisis is becoming a larger and larger problem. Thus, it should be a concern for us all, even if we do not face it personally here. Food insecurity is becoming a greater concern because prices are rising and resources are becoming more limited. Between the war, COVID, weather, and climate change, other environmental factors and circumstances we have experienced these past few years, it is becoming a very serious problem. I thought I would just end it with a quote on hunger that stood out to me. So that's that hunger is not an issue of charity, it is an issue of justice. And that is it. I'll end it with time for questions. Thank you.